Okay, well, hi everyone, and welcome to ADMG 475. Let's talk about Chapter 9, Budgeting Projects. So what we're going to discuss in this reading review is going to be a review of Chapter 9 from Contemporary Project Management on Budgeting Projects, which relates to Chapter 7 of the PMBOK, which is Project Cost Management. And remember that as we look at the PMBOK and we look at processes, cost management processes include planning cost management, estimating the cost, determining the budget, and then controlling the costs. So let's talk about planning cost management. It's really the process that establishes the policies, procedures, and documentation for planning, managing, expending, and controlling project costs, right? We all know that with every knowledge area, we have our planning processes, and that's all about how are we going to do it. A project cost management plan includes descriptions and procedures and responsibilities for things like the costs that are included, whether those costs are internal or external to the projects, and what contingency funding we may have. And remember, internal and external. Internal are the resources we're going to use that exist within the organization, and external are those things that we have to contract out to the supplier, contract procurement management, supplier contract management, things along those lines. And we always associate a cost with internal, even though these resources may work for the same organization we do. There's typically a cost associated with those internal resources. Activity resource estimating, we need to know how long things are going to take and how much it's going to cost. We do some cost estimating, we determine our budget, and then we figure out how are we going to control these costs. How are we going to report and manage changes? So in 7.2, we're talking about estimating costs, and the estimate of a cost is the process of developing an approximation of the monetary resources that we need to complete the project activities. Now notice it says approximate and estimate, and it's, I don't want to say wishy-washy, but let's face it, we really don't know what it's going to cost until we actually start executing. So this is really pretty important that we understand that we are doing our best to approximate. Now there's a number of techniques that we're going to use that are going to help us get an accurate estimation, an accurate approximation. But again, it's just an approximate until we actually do the work. Some of the ways that we can, some of the types of costs that we need to approximate are things like fixed or variable costs, direct or indirect, reoccurring or non-reoccurring, regular, expedited, internal, external, lease, purchase, labor, material, estimate, and reserve. These are all very different types of costs that we need to think about. Now, a work package may have many types of costs. So it's important for us to realize that activities typically don't just have one cost. They may have any number of costs associated, and this is an example of a work package, install module 1, that includes labor, hardware, software, consulting services. There's a lot. There's $65,000 worth of costs that are associated with this particular work package to implement or install the first module of an accounts payable refinement system. So please understand that a work package or even a task or activity may have multiple costs associated with that. So some of the methods for estimating costs, there are a number of ways we can estimate costs. The typical traditional one is bottom-up estimating, and that is by looking at the cost and duration of the lowest level components, and then as we work our way up, we start aggregating those costs. It takes the longest amount of time to do, and it requires the most detail, but we actually tend to get the best results. Analogous estimating is a technique for estimating the duration or cost of an activity based on historical data from a similar project. Analogous means similar. So we look at similar projects. If we have the data within our organization, we can look at similar projects and we can say, okay, well, it took that project this much time to do this work, and this work is similar to what we need to do. So we've got some ideas of how we can estimate based on looking at some historical data. Now, parametric estimating also looks at historical data, but it does so using an algorithm. So it's an estimating technique in which an algorithm is used to calculate cost or duration based on historical data and some very specific project parameters. Problems in estimating. So unless you have really strong previous experience in estimating, all estimates really are best guess. Okay? Really best guess. Now notice Exhibit 6.9 talks about cost estimating method comparison. So it looks at those three different types of estimating that I mentioned, analogous, parametric, and bottom up. And it looks and it says, okay, so the amount of information that's required, the amount of time that's required, and the accuracy that is obtained. So notice that bottom up takes the most information, it takes the longest amount of time, but we get the best accuracy when we use bottom-up estimating. Okay, and the least accurate is analogous, which gives us the lowest level of accuracy. But you know, we use the least amount of information, and that's the shortest amount of time. Okay, so some things to consider in terms of some estimating type techniques. Determining the budget and establishing cost control. Aggregating costs is all about distributing the costs of a project out over time. So let's say we go through all of this budgeting information, we assign dollar and cents amounts to everything, and then we determine that our project is going to cost us $235,000 to complete the project. Well, we don't just go and write a check for $235,000 when we start the project. We aggregate the costs over time, okay? And that's where that cost baseline usually comes in. And it's really important that we not forget about project reserves, and those are those monies that might be necessary in case we get into some kind of trouble. Cost control is the process of monitoring the status of the project to update this project costs and managing costs to the baseline. We want to make sure we control the costs by managing changes along the way. And change control here is really critical. All right, so that is our discussion on Chapter 9. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out to me. I hope you enjoy this topic.